Hey guys, tonight we begin with the cold, damp air of a London dawn sometime in the 17th or 18th century, the so-called golden age of piracy. But this isn't a tale of swashbuckling adventure on the high seas, not directly. Instead, you find yourself standing on the muddy, refuse-strewn banks of the River Thames at a place of grim renown. Execution Dock, Wapping. The tide is low, exposing the slick, dark mudflats. A raw, permanent gallows stands silhouetted against the pale gray light, its timbers perhaps still bearing the stains and sorrows of countless souls who met their end here. And today, a woman, a female pirate, is scheduled to die. She will not just face death, but a specific, horrifying ritual of public execution known as the MARSHAL'S Dance, and perhaps an even more grotesque post-mortem fate, the gibbeted horror of her body being left for three tides to wash over. Tonight, our journey takes us into the terrifying final chapter for those few audacious women who dared to defy not only the law of empires but also the rigid gender norms of their time by becoming pirates. We will explore the brutal reality of their capture, their often biased trials, and the particularly cruel and symbolic ways in which they were executed. This is not a story for the faint of heart, but it is a crucial, if often overlooked, aspect of maritime history and the grim mechanisms of state power. We will unveil the shocking secret of why, for a woman on the wrong side of the law at sea, the end was often far more terrifying than for her male counterparts. The reality check for tonight? While the image of a pirate, male or female, often carries a certain romantic allure, freedom, rebellion, adventure, the consequences of capture were anything but romantic. The legal systems of the great maritime powers, particularly the British Admiralty, showed little mercy to pirates of any gender. But for a woman, to be a pirate was to be doubly transgressive, an affront to God and nature in the eyes of her accusers and judges. The medical hardship was not just the threat of wounds in battle, but the prolonged agony of specific execution methods, the terror of public humiliation, and the often horrific conditions of imprisonment. Her human endurance would be tested to its absolute limit, not on the rolling deck of a ship, but on the unyielding wood of the gallows. So, before you get comfortable, before we witness the grim spectacle at Execution Dock and delve into the mechanics of the Marshal's Dance and the terror of gibbeting, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please do drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community, sharing these often unsettling explorations into the darker corners of history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We will confront the brutal fate of female pirates, examining how they were systematically broken, punished, and made terrifying examples of. This is a story of gory history, of societal fear, and of the almost unimaginable horrors inflicted upon those women who dared to choose a life beyond the pale, only to meet their end at the tide's edge, their final moments a horrifying public performance. Before you, our condemned female pirate, even reach that grim stage at Execution Dock, you have already navigated a treacherous journey through a world and a legal system, overwhelmingly designed by and for men. A world that views your very existence as a seagoing marauder as a profound aberration. The shocking secret is not just that female pirates were rare, though they certainly were, but that their gender, when they were captured, often made them targets of a unique, intensified form of societal and judicial condemnation. You are not just a pirate, you are a woman who has dared to step wildly, violently outside the prescribed boundaries of her sex. Imagine the 17th and 18th centuries, the so-called golden age of piracy. The vast majority of those who sailed under the black flag were, of course, men, but history and folklore have preserved the names of a few audacious women who joined their ranks. Anne Bonny, Mary Read, Grace O'Malley, from an earlier Irish context but whose legend endured, and perhaps countless others whose stories were never recorded or deliberately erased. For a woman to choose such a life of brutal freedom, violence, and camaraderie in an exclusively male domain, required an extraordinary degree of courage, desperation, or perhaps a complete rejection of the suffocating domestic roles society had ordained for her. The human endurance involved in simply surviving day to day on a pirate ship, with its rough conditions, constant danger, and often crude companionship, would have been immense for anyone. let alone a woman trying to hold her own. But if capture came, as it so often did with the increasing might of European navies determined to stamp out piracy, your gender, which might have offered some small, peculiar advantages or a degree of notoriety among your pirate brethren, now becomes your greatest liability in the eyes of the law, as the script notes you provided earlier from turn 277 so powerfully stated. What chance did a woman have in a naval courtroom where even the law was written by men who believed piracy was unnatural in a woman? The answer, chillingly, was almost none. You are seen as doubly transgressive. You have violated not only the king's or queen's imperial law by engaging in piracy, but you have also transgressed the deeply embedded gender norms of your society. You are an unnatural woman, a monstrous anomaly, and the legal system is often primed to make an example of you. The courts that try pirates, particularly in the colonies, like Jamaica, New Providence in the Bahamas, or the American colonies, are often makeshift naval tribunals, Admiralty Courts, operating under specific maritime law. These are not the common law courts with juries of your peers that you might find on land, though even those were hardly bastions of fairness for the lower classes or women. Admiralty Courts, as your script notes mentioned, often operated without juries, the verdict delivered by a panel of naval officers or colonial officials whose primary interest was the swift and decisive suppression of piracy to protect imperial trade and authority. The medical hardship here is the lack of any real due process, the scales of justice heavily weighted against you from the outset. One quirky tidbit, or rather, a grim reality, is that the very definition of piracy could be broad and sometimes politically motivated. Privateers, who operated with a letter of marque, government sanction, against enemy shipping in wartime, could easily be declared pirates if captured by that enemy, or even by their own government if political winds shifted or they overstepped their commission. For a woman on such a vessel, the lines would be even blurrier, her culpability perhaps assumed regardless of her actual role. The scholarly debate continues on how many women actively participated as combatants versus those who were present on pirate ships as wives, mistresses, or even unwilling captives who later turned pirate. But in the eyes of a colonial admiralty court, these distinctions often mattered little if you were found on a captured pirate vessel. The shocking secret is that your trial, as a female pirate, is less about determining guilt or innocence based on evidence, and more about reaffirming societal order and patriarchal authority. You are a spectacle of female deviance, and your condemnation is often a foregone conclusion, a necessary act to demonstrate that such unnatural behavior will be met with the harshest possible retribution. Your brief, rebellious life before the mast is about to lead you inexorably to a terrifying appearance before the court, a court that has likely already judged you long before you utter a single word in your own defense. You stand before the Admiralty Court, perhaps in a stuffy makeshift courtroom in a colonial port like Spanish Town, Jamaica, or a more formal but no less intimidating chamber back in England. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale beer, and the heavy, somber odor of the law. The judges, stern-faced men in wigs and robes, or perhaps grim naval officers in their stiff uniforms, regard you with expressions ranging from cold disapproval to outright disgust. You are the unnatural woman, the female pirate, a living embodiment of chaos and defiance, and your trial, as you quickly realize, is largely a formality, a ritualistic prelude to a predetermined and brutal conclusion. The shocking secret is that in this court, mercy is a commodity rarer than pirate gold, especially for someone like you. The evidence presented against you is likely a mixture of damning testimony and outright fabrication. Captains of merchant ships you and your crew plundered will detail their losses, perhaps exaggerating the ferocity of your actions. Captured sailors from those victimized vessels, their own lives hanging in the balance, might be coerced or eager to point you out as a particularly enthusiastic participant in the piratical enterprise. Even your former crewmates, if any were captured alive and chose to turn king's evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence, a common occurrence, might now spin tales of your bloodlust and depravity to save their own skins. The human endurance required to listen to these accusations, many of them lies or distortions, to maintain any semblance of composure as your character is systematically assassinated, is immense. You have few, if any, legal rights as we understand them today. There is no presumption of innocence. You likely have no lawyer to speak for you, no opportunity to rigorously cross-examine your accusers, no jury of your peers to weigh the evidence. The judges themselves often act as prosecutors, their questions designed to elicit a confession or confirm your guilt rather than to uncover the truth. The very fact that you, a woman, were found on a pirate ship, perhaps even dressed in men's attire, wielding weapons, is often considered damning evidence in itself. It speaks to your unnatural character, your rejection of God-given female roles. The medical hardship here is the crushing weight of a legal system designed not to protect, but to condemn those who deviate from its norms. The Piracy Act of 1698 passed under King William III, as your script notes from turn 277 highlighted, is a formidable legal weapon against you. This act made it unequivocally clear that all and every person so offending, by committing piracy, shall suffer pains of death. There was little room for leniency, little scope for judicial discretion, especially in the far-flung colonies where authorities were desperate to make an example of captured pirates to deter others. The finality of this law hangs over the courtroom like a shroud. One quirky tidbit, or rather a reflection of the prevailing misogyny, is how your actions as a female pirate might be interpreted by the court. If you were passive, perhaps a cook or a laundress on board, though even these roles were rare for women on pirate ships, you might still be considered complicit. If you were active, if you fought alongside the men, as figures like Anne Bonny and Mary Read reportedly did, then you are even more monstrous, a perversion of womanhood. There is no winning. Your very presence, your defiance of societal expectations, condemns you. The scholarly debate often explores how contemporary accounts of female pirates, written by men, often either sensationalized their ferocity or, conversely, tried to frame them as being led astray by male lovers, rarely affording them true agency or a fair hearing. And so, the verdict, when it comes, is almost inevitable. Guilty. Guilty of piracy, guilty of transgressing against God and King, guilty of being an unnatural woman. The sentence is pronounced with grave solemnity. You are to be taken from this place to a lawful prison, and thence to a place of execution, there to be hanged by the neck until you are dead. The gory history of execution dock, the marshal's dance, the gibbeted corpses swaying in the river breeze. These images, well known to all, now become your imminent, terrifying reality. The shocking secret is that for you, a woman condemned for piracy, there is usually no appeal, no hope of pardon, only the grim, inexorable march towards a brutal and public end, an end designed to erase your defiance and reinforce the iron will of empire. The guilty verdict has been delivered, the sentence of death by hanging pronounced with chilling finality. You, our condemned female pirate, are now led away from the biased Admiralty Court, not back to the relative freedom of a ship's deck, however lawless, but to the cold, oppressive embrace of one of England's most notorious prisons, Newgate. Here, in this fetid, overcrowded stone fortress in the heart of London, you will spend your final, agonizing days. A shocking secret world of suffering hidden behind its grim walls as you await your inexorable journey to execution dock. Imagine yourself being thrust into the squalor of Newgate in the 17th or 18th century. This is not a place of rehabilitation. It is a holding pen for the damned, a festering sore on the face of a burgeoning metropolis. The medical hardship here is immediate and overwhelming. The cells are tiny, dark, damp, and incredibly overcrowded. Straw on the floor, if any, is likely crawling with lice, fleas, and other vermin. The air is thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, human waste, sanitation being a horrifyingly primitive affair, often just a bucket in the corner, stale food, and the pervasive odor of sickness and despair. You can almost taste the filth, feel the damp chill seeping into your bones. Disease is rampant. Jail fever, typhus spread by lice, dysentery, smallpox, and various putrid fevers sweep through the prison population with terrifying regularity. For you, already likely weakened by the rigors of a pirate's life, capture, and trial, the risk of succumbing to illness even before you reach the gallows is very real. Your human endurance is now pitted against not just the law, but against an onslaught of pathogens in an environment designed to break both body and spirit. You might see fellow prisoners, men and women, writhing in fever, their bodies covered in sores, their coughs racking their emaciated frames, with little to no medical attention beyond the occasional, indifferent visit from a jail surgeon whose remedies are often as useless as they are unpleasant. Food, if provided at all by the jailers, is meager and of the poorest quality, perhaps a hunk of stale bread, some thin, watery gruel, or scraps of maggoty meat. More often, prisoners rely on charity from outside or on any small funds they might possess to purchase food from grasping jailers who profit exorbitantly from their captives' misery. If you have no money, no friends or family to bring you sustenance, then starvation is a very real and agonizing prospect. One quirky, or rather tragically common, feature of Newgate was the press yard, a slightly better section for those prisoners who could afford to pay for more space and slightly better conditions, a grim form of class distinction even among the condemned. The psychological torment of these final days is perhaps even worse than the physical squalor. You are in a constant state of dread, counting down the hours until your execution. The sounds of Newgate are a symphony of human misery. The rattling of chains, the groans of the sick and dying, the drunken shouts of desperate men, the occasional chilling sound of a prisoner being dragged off to punishment or execution. You might hear the prison chaplain intoning prayers, offering spiritual comfort that perhaps feels hollow in the face of such earthly despair. The scholarly debate sometimes explores the effectiveness or sincerity of religious consolation offered to condemned pirates. Were they truly seeking repentance, or just going through the motions? The shocking secret of Newgate is its role as a deliberate instrument of state terror, a place designed to break the will of even the most hardened criminals before they met their public end. For you, a female pirate, an unnatural woman, the experience might be even more isolating, more terrifying. You are a curiosity, a pariah. As you lie on your filthy straw pallet, the gory history of your impending marshal's dance and potential gibbeting at execution dock plays relentlessly in your mind, a terrifying countdown in the stinking darkness of your cell. This is the antechamber to your death, and it is a hell of its own making. The agonizing days and nights in the squalor of Newgate prison finally draw to their appointed dreadful end. On the morning of your execution, you, our condemned female pirate, are roused from whatever fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep you might have managed. The shocking secret now unfolds in its full public horror, the grim procession from the prison to execution dock at Wapping. This is not a quiet, discreet transfer. It is a calculated piece of public theater, a slow, humiliating parade through the very streets of London, designed to make a terrifying example of you and your fellow condemned pirates. Imagine the scene. You are brought out from the stinking depths of Newgate, perhaps blinking in the unfamiliar daylight, your limbs stiff, your body weakened by poor food and confinement. Your hands are likely bound tightly before you. You might be placed in a simple, open cart, a common mode of transport for the condemned, or, if the authorities wish to make a particular spectacle, you might even be forced to walk, a halter, a noose, already loosely around your neck, its other end perhaps held by a guard. The medical hardship of this journey, especially if you are ill or have been mistreated in prison, would be immense. Every jolt of the cart, every step on the rough cobblestones, sending fresh waves of pain through your body. The procession is heavily guarded. Mounted soldiers, men with pikes or muskets, surround your cart or flank you as you walk. Their purpose is twofold: to prevent any desperate, last-minute escape attempts, however unlikely, and to control the often unruly crowds that line the route. And the crowds? The crowds. This is a key part of the gory history of public executions. For many Londoners in the 17th and 18th centuries, an execution day was a form of grim public entertainment, a holiday of sorts. Taverns along the route would do a roaring trade. People would jostle for the best viewing positions, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the condemned. As your procession moves slowly through the crowded streets, you are subjected to a barrage of noise and emotion. There are the jeers, the insults, the curses hurled at you by a populace that has been encouraged to see pirates as the scum of the earth, enemies of God and trade. You might hear them shouting for your blood, mocking your plight, reviling you as an unnatural woman who has dared to step outside her ordained place. The human endurance required to face this wall of public hatred to maintain any shred of dignity as you are paraded like a captured beast is almost unimaginable. But amidst the jeers, there might also be other sounds. Perhaps the mournful tolling of church bells, a traditional accompaniment to a condemned prisoner's final journey. Perhaps the cries of street vendors hawking last dying speeches, often lurid, entirely fabricated accounts of your supposed crimes and confessions printed overnight to be sold to the morbidly curious crowd. One quirky, or rather grimly commercial, aspect of these events was this cottage industry of execution literature. The scholarly debate considers how much these printed accounts reflected any reality versus how much they were simply sensationalist propaganda designed to reinforce the state's narrative and profit from public curiosity. The procession is deliberately slow, winding its way through some of London's busiest thoroughfares to ensure maximum public exposure. It is a mobile cautionary tale, a terrifying reminder of the king's or queen's justice. For you, our female pirate, this journey is an agonizing prolongation of your suffering, a ritual of public shaming before the final act of physical annihilation. The shocking secret is that your death is not enough for the authorities. Your humiliation must also be complete, your infamy paraded for all to see, a lesson etched in fear into the collective consciousness of the city. The Tower of London and its execution dock await, the final stage in this brutal theater of death. Your slow, agonizing procession through the streets of London continues, each jolt of the cart, each hostile shout from the crowd, a fresh torment. You are now, our condemned female pirate, fully immersed in one of the most shocking, secret, yet openly acknowledged aspects of historical public executions, the behavior of the crowd. The gory history of these events is not just in the actions of the executioner, but in the reactions, the participation, the often frenzied and morbid fascination of the thousands who gathered to witness your demise. Imagine the scene as your cart rumbles over the cobblestones. The streets are packed. People lean from windows, climb onto rooftops, jostle in doorways, all desperate for a better view of you, the condemned. This is not a solemn, respectful assembly. For many, it is a holiday, a spectacle, a raw, visceral form of public entertainment. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, cheap ale, roasted nuts from street vendors, and an undercurrent of barely suppressed excitement and aggression. You can almost feel the medical hardship of this sensory assault, compounding your fear and despair. The sounds are overwhelming. As we noted, there are the jeers, the insults, the curses. Pirate whore, sea witch, to the gallows with her, hurled at you with vicious abandon by men, women, and even children, their faces contorted with a mixture of hatred, fear, and a strange, unsettling glee. They see in you not a fellow human being facing a terrible end, but a symbol of everything they have been taught to despise: disorder, rebellion, and in your case, female transgression. The human endurance required to withstand this torrent of public vilification, to maintain any facade of composure, is almost beyond measure. But it's not all just mindless aggression. There's also a deep, morbid curiosity. People want to see what a pirate looks like, especially a female one. They want to scrutinize your appearance, your demeanor. Do you look suitably penitent? Do you weep and beg for mercy? Or do you show defiance, a devil-may-care attitude that might perversely earn you a grudging, fleeting respect from some, even as it fuels the outrage of others? Your every flinch, every tear, every stoic glance is fodder for their gossip, for the stories they will tell later in the taverns. One quirky tidbit of these execution crowds was the belief that certain items associated with the condemned, a piece of their clothing, a lock of their hair, even the rope used for the hanging, possessed magical or protective properties. After an execution, there was often a mad scramble for such relics. While this might be less common with pirates, who were generally reviled, the underlying superstition and the desire for a tangible piece of the macabre spectacle were certainly present. The scholarly debate often considers the complex psychology of these crowds. What drew them to these displays of state-sanctioned violence? Was it a simple lust for sensation, a cathartic release of societal anxieties, a reaffirmation of communal norms through the punishment of a transgressor, or a complex mixture of all these things? The shocking secret is the degree to which the authorities often actively encouraged or at least tolerated this carnivalesque atmosphere. A large, vocal, and seemingly unified crowd condemning the pirate and affirming the king's or queen's justice served a powerful political purpose. It reinforced the idea that the pirate was an enemy of the people, not just the state, and that their execution was a righteous, necessary act. For you, our female pirate, the jeering, leering faces of the crowd are a terrifying sea of hostility, a final, brutal reminder that you are utterly alone, abandoned by society, your death not just a punishment, but a public sacrifice designed to satisfy their darkest curiosities and fears. The noise of their hatred will be one of the last sounds you hear before you reach the grim silence of Execution Dock. The agonizing, humiliating procession through the jeering streets of London finally reaches its grim destination, Execution Dock, situated at Wapping, on the north bank of the River Thames, just downstream from the Tower of London. As your cart lurches to a halt, you, our condemned female pirate, are confronted with the stark, terrifying reality of this infamous place, a shocking secret gateway to oblivion for countless seafarers who had dared to defy the maritime laws of England. This is where your journey and your life will end. Imagine the scene. Execution Dock is not a grand, stone-built scaffold like those sometimes erected for noble traders within the tower walls. It is a more utilitarian, more brutal structure. A permanent, sturdy wooden gallows, its timbers likely blackened by weather and the grim residue of past executions, stands starkly against the backdrop of the wide, muddy river. The location itself is deeply symbolic, as your script notes from turn 277 mentioned. Pirates who had lived by the sea would die by the sea, their executions often timed to occur at low tide, on the very foreshore where the river's authority met the lands. You can smell the salt and a quirky yet pungent odor of river mud, decaying matter, and perhaps the faint, lingering scent of tar from nearby shipbuilding or repair yards. The medical hardship of this place is not just physical, but psychological. The gallows is a potent symbol of state power and inevitable death. The very air seems thick with the ghosts of those who have perished here before you. The sounds are different now from the cacophony of the city streets. There is still the murmur of the assembled crowd, kept at a distance perhaps by a cordon of guards, but it is overlaid with the mournful cries of gulls, the creak of ships moored nearby, the lapping of the Thames against the muddy bank, and the sighing of the wind through the gallows frame. It's an atmosphere of grim finality. Execution Dock was specifically chosen by the Admiralty for pirate executions. Unlike common criminals hanged at Tyburn, pirates fell under maritime jurisdiction. Their crimes were seen as offenses against international trade, against the wealth and security of the empire, and as such, their punishment needed to be particularly public and symbolic. The gory history of this spot is long and bloody. For centuries, it served as England's primary execution site for piracy, mutiny, and other capital crimes committed at sea. You are treading on ground soaked, quite literally, with the final despairs of men, and a few women like yourself, who had chosen a life outside the law. The scholarly debate often considers the precise location of the original execution dock, as its exact spot might have shifted slightly over the centuries, but its general vicinity at Wapping and its function as a place of terrifying example are undisputed. One shocking secret is that the gallows here was often constructed to be particularly sturdy, capable of holding multiple bodies, as pirates were sometimes hanged in groups. While you might be the only woman facing this fate today, the structure itself speaks of mass death, of a relentless war waged by the state against those it deemed its maritime enemies. As you are unbound from the cart and led towards the foot of the gallows, the mud sucking at your worn shoes, this is your last view of the world, the gray river, the distant ships, the cold sky, the expectant, perhaps still jeering faces of the crowd, and the terrible, stark silhouette of the gallows above you. Your human endurance is stretched to its breaking point. The fear is a cold, constricting band around your chest. This is it, the gateway to oblivion, the place where your story and your breath will be brutally extinguished. You stand now at the very foot of the gallows at Execution Dock, the cold river mud seeping into your shoes, the equally cold eyes of the crowd fixed upon you. The shocking secret of pirate executions at this particular location, as we've touched upon, is their deliberate connection to the River Thames and its tides. Your death, our condemned female pirate, is not just a legal act. It is a ritual intertwined with the ancient, relentless rhythms of the water, a spectacle timed for maximum symbolic impact, and, as we shall see, for prolonged post-mortem horror. Imagine the scene. The execution is specifically scheduled to take place at low tide. This is not a matter of convenience, but of grim tradition and practical necessity for what is often to follow. The gallows itself is erected on the foreshore, that stretch of land exposed when the tide recedes. This means that as you await your final moments, the vast, dark, muddy expanse of the riverbed stretches out before you, a desolate and unwelcoming landscape. The human endurance required to simply stand there, knowing what is to come, the gallows looming, the crowd watching, the river waiting, is almost beyond comprehension. Why low tide? Part of the reason, as your script notes from turn 277 explained, relates to the horrific practice of gibbeting, of leaving the pirate's body to hang for 3 full tides to wash over it. A post-mortem punishment we will explore in dreadful detail later. For the hanging itself, low tide provides a solid, if muddy, platform for the scaffold and for the assembled officials and the executioner. It also ensures that the body, once hanged, will be fully exposed to the elements and the public gaze as the tide begins to turn and creep back in. The medical hardship of this waiting period, however brief or prolonged, is primarily psychological, but no less real. Every sound, the lapping of the water, the cry of a gull, the rustle of the wind in the rigging of nearby ships, the murmur of the crowd, is amplified, imbued with a terrifying significance. Your senses are heightened, your body perhaps trembling with a mixture of cold, fear, and adrenaline. You might see the executioner, the marshal of the Admiralty's man, making his final preparations, checking the rope, his expression impassive, professional, a craftsman of death. One quirky, or rather grimly atmospheric detail, is the quality of light at low tide on a gray London morning. It can be a flat, unforgiving light, revealing every sordid detail of the surroundings, or, if there are breaks in the clouds, shafts of watery sunlight might pierce through, creating an almost surreal theatrical illumination for your final act. The scholarly debate might consider the specific symbolism intended by the Admiralty in choosing this liminal space, the very boundary between land and sea, between the king's law and the anarchic freedom the pirate supposedly represented. You are being executed at the edge of your former domain, the sea that once offered you escape now becoming a silent witness to your state-sanctioned demise. The shocking secret is the cold, calculated theatricality of it all. Every element, from the location to the timing, is designed to maximize the deterrent effect and the public humiliation. You are not just being killed, you are being made into a lesson, a terrifying example. As you stand in the shadow of the gallows, the vast, empty riverbed before you, you are acutely aware that the tide is waiting to play its part in the gruesome spectacle that will follow your death. The Marshal's Dance is about to begin, and the river itself will be your unwilling audience, and ultimately, your defiling accomplice. The agonizing wait at the foot of the gallows on the muddy foreshore of Execution Dock is almost over. The Marshal of the Admiralty, or his deputy, has likely read the formal sentence of death one last time, the legal words a cold, impersonal prelude to the violence to come. You, our condemned female pirate, now face the final, terrifying rituals before the Marshal's Dance begins. Will you be afforded any last rites, any opportunity for final words, or will your end be as brutal and unceremonious as your capture and trial often were? In the 17th and 18th centuries, even for the most reviled criminals, it was customary for a priest or chaplain to attend the condemned in their final moments. This figure, often the ordinary of Newgate Prison, would have likely accompanied you in the cart during the procession from Newgate, perhaps exhorting you to confess your sins, to repent, and to make your peace with God before meeting your Maker. Imagine this somber, black-clad figure now standing beside you on or near the scaffold, a prayer book in hand, his voice a low murmur against the backdrop of the crowd's noise and the river's sigh. The human endurance is in trying to find some solace, some meaning in these last rites, even as your heart hammers with terror. Are you, a female pirate, an unnatural woman, afforded the same spiritual consolations as a male condemned prisoner? The scholarly debate suggests that while the forms might be observed, the sincerity or depth of religious ministration could vary. Some priests might see in you a particularly lost soul, a brand to be plucked from the burning, and make fervent efforts for your repentance. Others, perhaps reflecting societal condemnation, might perform their duties with a colder formality. One quirky detail is that the last dying speeches of condemned criminals, often printed and sold to the crowds, were sometimes heavily influenced, if not entirely fabricated, by these attending chaplains, designed to present a suitably penitent and moralizing narrative. regardless of the prisoner's actual final words or sentiments. Are you allowed to speak your own last words? This was a tradition, though not always a right, for many condemned prisoners. It was their final opportunity to address the crowd, to confess, to ask for forgiveness, to warn others against a life of crime, or, in some rare, brave cases, to protest their innocence or defy their accusers. For a female pirate, the opportunity to speak might be even more fraught. Would your words be heard with any sympathy, or only with more derision? Would you choose defiance like Anne Bonny's bitter retort to Calico Jack? If you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog. Or a more conventional expression of penitence? The shocking secret is that even if you are allowed to speak, your words are likely to be twisted, reinterpreted, or simply lost amidst the noise and prejudice of the spectacle. And then, the noose. The executioner steps forward. The coarse, heavy rope, reeking perhaps of tar and past usage, is placed around your neck. This is the ultimate medical hardship in its final, terrifying immediacy, the instrument of your slow strangulation. You feel its rough texture against your skin, the way it constricts even before the drop. Your hands are bound, you are utterly helpless. You might be offered a hood or a blindfold, a small, conventional mercy to spare you the sight of the crowd or the final preparations, though as we've discussed, it also served the practical purpose of preventing flinching. As these last, terrible moments unfold, you are acutely aware of the crowd, the officials, the priest, the executioner, the gallows, the waiting river. Your world has shrunk to this tiny, muddy stage of death. The gory history of countless others who have stood where you now stand, who have felt what you now feel, presses in on you. Your final prayers, if you can form them, are perhaps a desperate plea for a swift end, a mercy that the Marshal's Dance is specifically designed to deny. The noose is adjusted. The priest steps back. The executioner makes his final check. A profound, terrible silence might fall, just for a heartbeat, before the signal is given. The final prayers are said, or left unsaid. The noose is tight around your neck, a suffocating premonition. You, our condemned female pirate, stand on the precipice. The jeering or silent crowd a blur before your, perhaps blindfolded eyes. Then, the signal is given. The platform beneath your feet gives way, or the cart you were standing in is pulled sharply away. And the Marshal's Dance, that uniquely horrifying method of English hanging for pirates and others executed by the Admiralty, begins. The shocking secret of this technique is not its efficiency in causing death, but its calculated cruelty in prolonging agony. This is not the long drop method of hanging that would later be developed in the 19th century, designed to snap the neck and cause, in theory at least, instantaneous death or rapid unconsciousness. No, execution dock in the 17th and 18th centuries employed the short drop. This meant you fell only a very short distance, perhaps just a foot or two, not enough to generate the force needed to break your cervical vertebrae. Instead of a quick, clinical end, the short drop is designed to kill by slow strangulation or asphyxiation, as the noose constricts your airway and the major blood vessels in your neck. The medical hardship is almost unimaginable. The desperate, futile fight for breath, the terrifying sensation of your life being squeezed out of you, moment by agonizing moment. Why was this brutal method used? The scholarly debate offers several grim possibilities. Perhaps it was simply tradition, the way things had always been done at Admiralty executions. Perhaps it was believed to be a more shameful death, fitting for reviled criminals like pirates. Or perhaps, and this is a particularly gory history aspect, it was deliberately chosen for its theatricality, for the prolonged, visible suffering it inflicted, thereby maximizing its deterrent effect on the watching crowd. The Marshal's Dance refers to the grotesque, involuntary convulsions and twitching of the dying prisoner's limbs as their body fights against asphyxiation, a ghastly, jerking dance at the end of the rope. You can imagine the horrified fascination of the crowd, witnessing this prolonged, public death. For you, the experience is a desperate, suffocating terror. As the rope bites into your neck, your airway is crushed. You gasp for air, but find none. Your lungs burn. Your vision might dim, then flare with strange lights. There is a roaring in your ears. Your body, in its primal fight for survival, begins to convulse, to thrash, your legs kicking, your hands, if not too tightly bound, perhaps clawing at the rope. This is the dance. the horrifying spectacle that gives the method its cynical name. One quirky, or rather utterly macabre detail is that executioners sometimes, either out of a strange form of pity or to hasten the end for a particularly prolonged dance, would pull on the victim's legs or hang on their body to increase the pressure on the neck and speed up asphyxiation. How long does this agony last? Minutes, perhaps 5, 10, even 15 or more in some horrifying cases, depending on the efficiency of the noose, the strength of the victim, and other grim variables. It is an eternity of suffering, a conscious or semi-conscious descent into the blackness of oblivion. The human endurance of your body in this final, terrible struggle is a testament to life's tenacious hold, even in the face of such overwhelming, state-sanctioned violence. The Marshal's Dance is not a dance of celebration, but a dance of death, a slow, agonizing, and brutally public expiration, a terrifying performance for the edification and intimidation of all who witness your end. The Marshal's Dance, that prolonged, agonizing strangulation at the end of a short-drop gallows, is a horrific fate for any human being. But for you, our condemned female pirate, this public, convulsive death carries additional layers of specific horror, humiliation, and societal messaging. The shocking secret is how your gender, even in these final, brutal moments, shapes the nature of your punishment and the way it is perceived by the jeering, fascinated crowd at execution dock. Imagine yourself, a woman, suspended at the end of that rope, your body writhing in the involuntary dance of asphyxiation. In an era with rigid ideas about female modesty, decorum, and the sanctity, or inherent weakness and corruptibility of the female form, this public display of your dying agonies is a profound violation. Your struggles, your contortions, the potential loss of bodily control in these final moments, all are laid bare for the public gaze, a gaze that is likely a mixture of morbid curiosity, condemnation, and perhaps for some, a perverse titillation. The medical hardship is not just the physical pain, but this utter, public stripping away of dignity, the reduction of your female body to a spectacle of state-sanctioned violence. The very act of you being a pirate, an unnatural woman who has usurped male roles and engaged in masculine violence, is central to the meaning of your execution. Your punishment is not just for piracy, it is also for your transgression against the gender order. The crowd sees not just a pirate dying, but a woman pirate dying, and this adds a specific frisson to the event. Your agony serves as a particularly potent warning to other women who might dare to step outside their prescribed domestic sphere, who might entertain thoughts of rebellion or autonomy. The gory history of your death is thus a gendered lesson, a brutal reaffirmation of patriarchal power. One quirky, or rather, deeply disturbing aspect is how contemporary accounts, often written by men, might describe the death of a female pirate. Is there a greater emphasis on her perceived wickedness, her unfeminine nature? Is there a different kind of morbid attention paid to her physical suffering, or perhaps a moralizing commentary on her presumed sexual depravity? The scholarly debate continues on how gender influenced the perception and representation of female criminals in this period. Were they seen as even more monstrous than their male counterparts because they had violated not just the law but also the natural order of things? The human endurance required of you, even in these last moments, is to face this specifically gendered horror. You are not just an enemy of the state, you are a failed woman, a monstrous aberration, and your public, agonizing death is designed to underscore that failure, to purge society of your unnatural presence. The shocking secret is that the rope that strangles you, the gallows that displays you, are instruments not just of legal retribution, but of a powerful, societal reassertion of gender norms. Your Marshal's Dance is a horrifying performance of female deviance being brutally, publicly, and fatally corrected. It is a spectacle designed to ensure that your story serves as a terrifying deterrent, especially to any other woman who might dream of a life of freedom, however fleeting, upon the high seas. The Marshal's Dance continues. Your body, our condemned female pirate, a grotesque puppet jerking at the end of the rope, a horrifying spectacle for the assembled crowd at execution dock. This is the gory history of a slow, agonizing death by strangulation, the shocking secret of a punishment designed not for swiftness but for prolonged suffering and public terror. How long does this final, desperate struggle last? It feels like an eternity to you, and perhaps even to some of the more hardened onlookers. Imagine the physiological process, the medical hardship in its starkest form. The noose, tied around your neck, constricts your carotid arteries, cutting off the main blood supply to your brain. It also crushes your trachea, preventing air from reaching your lungs. Consciousness, though not extinguished instantly, as in a long drop hanging, begins to fade amidst a terrifying kaleidoscope of sensations, a roaring in your ears, flashing lights, or deepening darkness before your eyes, the desperate, futile commands of your brain to your lungs to breathe. Your face becomes congested, perhaps turning a horrifying purplish blue as oxygen is depleted. Your tongue may protrude, your eyes may bulge, and your body fights. Even as your higher brain functions cease, the primal survival instincts, the involuntary reflexes take over. This is the dance. The muscles of your limbs and torso convulse, twitch, and jerk spastically as they are starved of oxygen. Your legs might kick out, your arms flail, your body writhe and twist. It's a purely physical, autonomic response, but to the crowd, it appears as a terrifying, almost demonic struggle, a visible manifestation of your life being forcibly extinguished. One quirky detail. Sometimes the force of these convulsions could be so violent that clothing might be disarranged, adding another layer of perceived shame or grotesque spectacle, especially for a female victim. The executioner, the marshal's man, watches with a practiced, perhaps indifferent eye. His job is to ensure the sentence is carried out. As we mentioned, if the dance is too prolonged, too lively, he or his assistants might pull down on your legs, adding their weight to hasten the process to ensure the final strangulation is complete. This crude intervention, far from being an act of mercy, is simply a means of expediting the grim business at hand, perhaps to make way for the next condemned prisoner or to satisfy the crowd's impatience for the spectacle to reach its conclusion. Finally, after minutes that have stretched into an agonizing eternity for you, the convulsions begin to lessen. The twitches become feebler. The desperate, involuntary fight for life subsides. Your body, which had thrashed so violently, now hangs more limply, a dead weight at the end of the rope. A physician or surgeon, if one is officially present, which was not always the case for common pirate executions, might eventually pronounce you dead, though the methods for determining death in this era were themselves often crude and unreliable. The scholarly debate sometimes touches upon how long a person might actually remain alive, or capable of some minimal brain activity during such a process. A horrifying unknown. The shocking secret is the sheer, brutal physicality of this state-sanctioned killing. There is no dignity, no swift release, only a prolonged, public, and agonizing struggle as your life is literally choked out of you. The Marshal's Dance ends not with a final bow, but with a final shuddering stillness. Your life as a female pirate, a life of daring, defiance, and perhaps desperation, is extinguished, your body now just an object, a gruesome trophy of the Admiralty's justice. But your ordeal, and your public humiliation, is not yet entirely over. Your life has been brutally extinguished at the end of the hangman's rope, the Marshal's Dance having reached its grim conclusion. You, our female pirate, now hang lifeless from the gallows at Execution Dock, a stark silhouette against the gray London sky. But the shocking secret is that for many pirates, especially the most notorious or those the authorities wished to make a particular example of, death itself was not the end of their public humiliation. The spectacle of the corpse, the post-mortem punishment, was an integral, and often even more gory, part of the ritual of terror. Imagine the scene. Your body, after a legally mandated period, often an hour to ensure death was absolute, is cut down from the gallows, but you are not immediately given over to your family, if you had any who dared claim you, for a decent burial. Instead, a new phase of degradation might begin, one designed to serve as an even more potent and lasting warning to any who might contemplate a life of piracy. The medical hardship now is the utter desecration of your physical remains, the denial of even the most basic human respect for the dead. The most infamous of these post-mortem punishments, as your script notes from turn 277 highlighted, was gibbeting. This involved the executed pirate's body being encased in a specially made iron cage or bound with chains and then hung up again, not necessarily for immediate further execution, but for long-term public display in a prominent location. For pirates, this often meant being gibbeted at a strategic point along the River Thames, or at the entrance to a major port, where your decaying corpse would be visible to all passing ships and seafarers, a rotting, gruesome effigy of maritime justice. You can almost see the quirky, yet horrifyingly practical blacksmith work involved in crafting these human-shaped iron cages. While the script notes mention that gibbeting was more common for male pirates, the very threat of it, and the possibility that a particularly notorious female pirate might be subjected to such a fate, would have been a powerful psychological deterrent. The human endurance now belongs to the public, forced to endure the sight and stench of these decaying bodies as part of their daily landscape. The scholarly debate considers how effective such gruesome displays actually were as deterrents, or if they simply brutalized society further and fed a morbid public appetite for horror. If not gibbeted in an iron cage, your body might still be subjected to other indignities. Sometimes the bodies of executed pirates were tarred to preserve them for longer public display, turning them into blackened, leathery scarecrows. Or, as we are about to explore in horrifying detail, they might be deliberately left hanging at execution dock itself, specifically positioned so that their remains would be subjected to the three tides, a uniquely maritime form of post-mortem punishment. The shocking secret of this phase is the state's relentless determination to extend its power even beyond death, to use the pirate's corpse as a tool of propaganda and terror. Your body, once a vessel of defiance and freedom on the high seas, is now reduced to an object of public revulsion, a silent, decaying sermon against piracy. The story of Anne Bonny and Mary Read, who temporarily escaped the noose by pleading the belly, stands in stark contrast to the fate of those less fortunate, if such a word can even be used in this context, who did not have such a legal loophole. For them, and potentially for you, the spectacle of death was designed to be as prolonged and as horrifying as the authorities could make it, ensuring your end was not just a punishment but a terrifying, unforgettable lesson. The immediate, convulsive horror of the Marshal's Dance is over. Your lifeless body, our executed female pirate, has been cut down from the gallows. But now, as you lie on the cold, muddy foreshore of Execution Dock, a new and perhaps even more shocking secret of maritime punishment is about to unfold, a ritual of post-mortem desecration uniquely tied to this riverside location, the ordeal of the three tides. This practice, often a prelude to or a component of longer-term gibbeting, was a gruesome spectacle designed to ensure your infamy and your physical remains were thoroughly cleansed by the very waters you once sailed as a pirate. Imagine the scene. Your body is not immediately removed for burial, nor is it necessarily taken to be encased in an iron gibbet cage just yet, though that might come later for some. Instead, it is deliberately left on the exposed mudflats of the Thames at low tide, perhaps still loosely bound, or even secured to a post or a section of the gallows itself, in a position where the incoming tide will inevitably submerge it. The gory history of this practice is its calculated passive brutality, allowing the river itself to become an instrument of public defilement. The three tides refers to the legal or customary requirement that the body remain exposed in this manner until it has been washed over by 3 full cycles of the tide. This could mean being left there for a day and a half or even longer depending on the tidal patterns. You can picture the scene. As the tide begins to turn and the murky waters of the Thames creep slowly, inexorably, up the mudflats, your body is gradually submerged. The cold, polluted river water washes over you, filling your clothes, your hair, perhaps even seeping into your mouth and nostrils. Then, as the tide recedes again, your sodden, disheveled corpse is re-exposed, covered in river slime and debris, perhaps already beginning to show the early signs of water-induced decomposition. This cycle repeats twice more. The medical hardship here is of course posthumous, but the visual and symbolic horror for the living is immense. This practice served multiple grim purposes. It was a profound public humiliation, ensuring that your body was displayed in a state of utter degradation. It was also a symbolic cleansing, the river washing away your piratical sins, or perhaps, more grimly, reclaiming one of its own. And practically, it likely hastened decomposition in a way that made subsequent long-term gibbeting in chains or a cage even more horrific, as the flesh would be softened and more prone to putrefaction and scavenging by river creatures or birds. One quirky, or rather, deeply unsettling detail is how this practice connected to the very identity of the pirate. You lived by the sea, you transgressed upon the sea, and now, even in death, the sea itself is made your final, defiling executioner and display case. The scholarly debate might consider the folkloric or superstitious underpinnings of this ritual. Was there a belief that this title washing somehow prevented your ghost from returning, or that it satisfied some ancient maritime deity? Or was it purely a calculated act of state terror designed to instill maximum fear in other seafarers? The shocking secret of the three tides is its unique blend of passive natural process and active human cruelty. The river does the work, but it is the law, the Admiralty, that decrees your body be subjected to this relentless, repetitive immersion and exposure. It's a slow, watery erasure, a public unmaking, ensuring that your end is not just death, but a prolonged, elemental desecration, a horrifying prelude to potentially even longer exposure on the gibbet. Your body, once a symbol of defiance, now becomes a sodden, polluted offering to the river and a terrifying warning to all who pass by. The ordeal of the three tides at execution dock may be over, your lifeless body, our female pirate, having been repeatedly submerged and exposed by the murky waters of the Thames. But for some, particularly the most notorious or those deemed deserving of the ultimate deterrent, the shocking secret of post-mortem punishment continues, escalating into an even more prolonged and public display of gibbeted horror. This is the practice of encasing the corpse in an iron cage or chains and hanging it from a prominent gibbet, often for months, even years, until little more than a skeleton remains, picked clean by birds and bleached by the sun and wind. Imagine the scene. After the three tides, your sodden, decomposing remains are taken, not for burial, but to a blacksmith's forge. Here, a custom-fitted iron gibbet cage is prepared. This cage, as we've touched upon, is a horrifying piece of craftsmanship, roughly conforming to the human shape, designed to hold the decaying body together as it hangs, preventing it from falling apart too quickly. You can almost hear the clang of the hammer on iron, the quirky, yet gruesome practicality of fitting these iron bands around what is left of your human form. Your body might be tarred, as mentioned before, to slow down decomposition further and make the spectacle last longer, turning your remains into a blackened, leathery effigy. Then, you are transported to the chosen site for gibbeting. For pirates, this is almost invariably a highly visible location along the coast or at a major harbor entrance, perhaps at Tilbury Point, where the Thames meets the sea, or near other key ports around England or its colonies. The gibbet itself is a tall, sturdy post with a projecting arm from which your caged or chained body is suspended high in the air, a constant, unavoidable reminder of the price of piracy. You become a gruesome landmark, a navigational warning of a different, more terrifying kind. The human endurance is now that of the public, forced to live with this macabre spectacle, and perhaps the medical hardship is the potential for disease to spread from such decaying remains, though the tarring might have mitigated this to some extent. For you, a female pirate, the gibbeting carries that extra layer of unnatural transgression being punished. While your script notes suggested this was more common for male pirates, the sheer terror of it and the possibility that an exceptionally infamous woman might suffer this fate served its purpose. Your female form, now a decaying object of public display, is subjected to the ultimate desecration. Birds of prey, gulls, crows, ravens, would pick at your flesh. The wind would whistle through your cage, perhaps causing it to sway and creak, a constant, eerie motion. The sun would bleach your bones. Rain and sea spray would complete the work of reducing you to a skeletal warning. The scholarly debate considers the psychological impact of these gibbeted bodies on the populace. Did they truly deter crime, or did they simply desensitize people to violence and death, or even become objects of morbid folklore and ghost stories? The gory history of these displays is undeniable. Children would grow up seeing these grim sentinels. Sailors would point them out as they entered or left port. They were an accepted, if horrifying, part of the landscape of justice. The shocking secret of gibbeting is its calculated, long-term psychological warfare. It is a punishment that extends far beyond the individual's death, aiming to terrorize an entire population and to utterly annihilate the identity and legacy of the condemned, reducing them to a nameless, faceless horror. Your story, your defiance, your very womanhood is intended to be consumed by the elements in the public gaze, leaving only a stark, terrifying lesson in the absolute power of the state. Your gibbeted horror is the final, brutal punctuation mark on a life lived outside the law and a womanhood deemed monstrous. You have now witnessed, in horrifying detail, the full arc of a female pirate's execution in 17th or 18th century England, the biased trial, the grim procession, the agonizing marshal's dance at execution dock, the defilement of the three tides, and the ultimate prolonged horror of gibbeting. As you absorb the sheer, calculated cruelty of these rituals, the shocking secret that crystallizes is their overarching purpose. These were not merely acts of punishment. They were meticulously crafted instruments of terror, designed to send an unequivocal, terrifying message to all who might contemplate defying the authority of the British Empire, and a particularly potent warning to women who dared to step outside their rigidly defined roles. Imagine the mindset of the authorities, the Admiralty judges, the colonial governors, the Crown itself. Piracy, in their eyes, was a cancer on maritime trade, a direct threat to the burgeoning wealth and power of the empire. It had to be eradicated, not just through naval patrols and battles at sea, but through overwhelming, unforgettable displays of state power on land. The gory history of these executions was a deliberate policy, a form of psychological warfare waged against a largely unseen enemy. The more brutal, the more public, the more prolonged the punishment, the greater its perceived deterrent effect. You can almost hear them in their council chambers discussing the efficacy of a particularly gruesome gibbeting in suppressing local piracy, the medical hardship inflicted upon the condemned, the slow strangulation, the exposure of the corpse was not an unfortunate byproduct, but an essential component of this theater of terror. The suffering was the message. The marshal's dance, with its visible convulsions, was far more terrifying to witness than a quick, clean beheading, which was generally reserved for the nobility on Tower Hill, not common pirates at Wapping. The three tides and the gibbeted, decaying body transformed the dead pirate into a constant, unavoidable memento mori, a rotting sermon on the consequences of transgression. And for you, our female pirate, this message carried an extra, venomous layer. As we've discussed, your crime was twofold: piracy and the violation of your natural womanly station. By choosing a life of violence, independence, and assumed sexual license on the high seas, you represented a profound threat to the patriarchal social order. Therefore, your punishment needed to be not just terrifying but also a ritual of reasserting that order, of putting the unnatural woman back in her place, albeit a place on the gallows or in a gibbet cage. The public degradation of your female body was a powerful warning to other women. This is the fate of those who defy male authority, who reject domesticity, who dare to be masters of their own ship. One quirky, or rather deeply ironic detail is that the very notoriety and rarity of female pirates like Anne Bonny and Mary Read probably made the authorities even more determined to make an example of any woman captured, to ensure that their legends did not inspire others. The scholarly debate considers whether female pirates were, in fact, treated more harshly than their male counterparts when it came to the symbolic aspects of their punishment, even if the actual methods of execution were similar. The shocking secret is that the entire apparatus of your trial and execution, Isabel, or Anne, or Mary, or any other name you might bear as our symbolic female pirate, is designed to maximize fear and reinforce control. Control over maritime trade, control over colonial populations, and most definitely, control over the lives and choices of women. Your death is intended to be a lesson written in agony and displayed in rotting flesh, a lesson that echoes far beyond the muddy banks of the Thames. While the sagas of Anne Bonny and Mary Read, with their dramatic trials and temporary reprieves due to pleading the belly, often capture the popular imagination when thinking of female pirates, the shocking secret is that their cases, particularly the temporary stays of execution, might have been more the exception than the rule. Many other women who fell afoul of maritime law or were accused of piracy likely met a swifter, less celebrated, but no less brutal end. Your script notes from turn 277 provide one such poignant example. Mary Critchett, an American woman whose story offers a stark glimpse into the summary justice often meted out in the colonies. Imagine the scene, not in the bustling hub of London or a major Caribbean pirate port like Port Royal, but in the colonial setting of Williamsburg, Virginia, around 1729. Mary Critchett, as your notes described her, was an American woman who had reportedly joined a crew of escaped convicts who had turned to piracy. This detail itself is a quirky insight into the desperate circumstances that might drive someone, especially a woman with few legitimate options, to such a life. She is not a swashbuckling captain, perhaps not even a combatant in the mold of Bonnie or Red, but her association with a pirate crew is enough to seal her fate when their vessel is captured near the Virginia coast. You are Mary Critchett, brought before the colonial authorities in Williamsburg. There is no grand Admiralty Court here, perhaps just a panel of local magistrates or officials, eager to assert English law and make an example of any pirates threatening the colony's trade and security. The human endurance required to face such a provincial, yet no less deadly tribunal, far from any hope of significant legal aid or public sympathy, must have been immense. Her trial, if it followed the pattern of many colonial pirate trials, would have been swift. The evidence likely stacked against her, her gender perhaps an aggravating factor in the eyes of the stern colonial judges. The script notes state she was found guilty of piracy. She was sentenced to death and hanged without fanfare, without delay. No pleas of pregnancy saved her. This is the grim, unvarnished reality for many. There is no dramatic courtroom speech, no last-minute reprieve, no lingering legend, just a swift condemnation and an efficient execution. The medical hardship here is the stark finality, the lack of any illusion of due process or mercy. She is simply a problem to be eliminated. The scholarly debate might consider why some cases, like Bonnie and Reed's, became legendary, while others, like Mary Critchett's, faded into relative obscurity. Was it the scale of their alleged crimes? The flamboyance of their personalities, as reported by Captain Charles Johnson, a key, if not always reliable source for pirate history? Or simply the luck of which chroniclers or court reporters happened to document their stories? The shocking secret is that for every famous pirate whose tale has been romanticized, there were likely many more, like Mary Critchett, whose lives and deaths were brutal, short, and largely unrecorded, their suffering a forgotten footnote in the gory history of the war against piracy. Mary Critchett's execution in Williamsburg, without fanfare, without delay, serves as a stark counterpoint to the elaborate, theatrical rituals of execution dock in London. It demonstrates that while the methods might vary slightly by location, the outcome for a woman convicted of piracy was almost invariably the same: a brutal death designed to punish her transgression and terrify others into compliance. Her unheralded end is a somber reminder of the countless forgotten victims of this harsh maritime justice, especially the women whose stories were so easily erased. The public execution of a female pirate, with its attendant horrors, the Marshal's Dance, the potential for gibbeting, the jeering crowds, was a spectacle designed to instill terror and reinforce authority. But beyond its intended deterrent effect, what was the deeper psychological impact of witnessing such brutal, state-sanctioned violence, especially when the victim was a woman? The shocking secret is that these gruesome displays, while perhaps satisfying a morbid public curiosity, also left lasting psychological scars on individuals and, arguably, on society as a whole. Imagine yourself as a member of that crowd at execution dock, or perhaps in a colonial town square, witnessing the hanging or flogging of a female pirate. You might have come out of curiosity, out of a sense of civic duty, or perhaps even out of a darker desire for vicarious excitement. But what you witness is the slow, agonizing death of a fellow human being, or their brutal physical torment under the lash. The medical hardship is not yours directly, but the visceral, empathetic response your own body might have to seeing such suffering. A quickening pulse, a knot in your stomach, perhaps even nausea or fainting. As your script notes on Anne Boleyn's execution mentioned, some witnesses did. For children in the crowd, the impact could be even more profound. Seeing such violence normalized, presented as a legitimate act of justice, could shape their understanding of power, authority, and the value of human life in deeply disturbing ways. The gory history they witness becomes part of their formative experience. The scholarly debate in modern psychology and criminology often discusses the brutalizing effect of public executions. Did they truly deter crime, or did they simply inure society to violence, making it more, not less, common? And what of those more directly involved? The executioner himself, though a hardened professional, what was the psychological toll of repeatedly inflicting such deaths, especially on a woman? The guards who led her to the scaffold, the priest who offered last rites, the officials who presided, Did they become desensitized, or did some carry a hidden burden of what they had participated in? Your script notes on Anne Boleyn's execution poignantly described her ladies-in-waiting, forced to handle her severed head, suffering nightmares for years. While a female pirate might not have such loyal attendants, any women present, or even men with a degree of empathy, could be deeply affected. One quirky detail is that sometimes after a particularly gruesome execution, the public mood could shift from condemnation of the criminal to a kind of morbid sympathy, or even a backlash against the perceived excessive cruelty of the state. The line between justice and barbarity was a thin one, and public opinion, however powerless, could occasionally be swayed by the sheer horror of the spectacle. The shocking secret of these public displays of terror is their potential to traumatize as much as to deter. They were a raw, brutal form of social control, but they also exposed the darkest underbelly of human nature, both in the cruelty of the state and in the morbid fascination of the crowd. The psychological scars left by witnessing such events, particularly the execution of a woman in such a brutal manner, might not have been visible, but they were undoubtedly real, contributing to a culture of fear, a normalization of violence, and a hardening of hearts that would linger long after the tide had washed away the blood from execution dock. The human endurance was not just that of the condemned, but of a society forced to bear witness to its own capacity for brutality. The female pirate has met her gruesome end. Her body, perhaps subjected to the Marshal's Dance, the three tides, and the prolonged agony of the gibbet, has finally been reduced to a forgotten scattering of bones, or a name in a grim, dusty ledger. The shocking secret of her legacy is often one of deliberate erasure by the very authorities who made such a public spectacle of her death. While her execution was designed to be an unforgettable warning, her individual story, her motivations, her humanity were frequently suppressed, distorted, or simply allowed to fade into obscurity. Yet, paradoxically, it is the very horror of her punishment and the transgressive nature of her existence that sometimes ensures she is remembered, if only as a figure of dark legend. Imagine the efforts made by the state to control the narrative. Official accounts of your trial and execution, if published, would emphasize your wickedness, your unnatural deviance, and the justness of your punishment. Any complexities in your story, any mitigating circumstances, any hint of sympathy you might have garnered would be carefully omitted. As your script notes on Anne Boleyn highlighted, court painters could be instructed to destroy portraits, emblems removed, and the very mention of a condemned name discouraged. While a common female pirate might not have had portraits to destroy, the principle of erasing her from legitimate historical memory, of reducing her to a mere cautionary tale of female depravity, would still apply. The human endurance of her story, to survive this official suppression, often relies on unofficial channels: folklore, ballads, the hushed whispers of sailors. The medical hardship of her erasure is the loss of her true voice, her true experiences. We are left with fragments, often filtered through the hostile accounts of her captors or the sensationalist narratives of chapbook writers. Who was she really? What drove her to a life of piracy? Was it desperation, a desire for freedom, a rebellious spirit, or was she perhaps an unwilling participant, a captive herself? These questions often remain unanswered, her true story lost to the silence imposed by those who condemned her. One quirky detail is how quickly such figures, especially if their crimes or punishments were particularly notorious, could transform into bogey women in local folklore, their names invoked to frighten children or to explain strange occurrences along the coast. The historical woman is lost, but a monstrous caricature born of fear and official propaganda endures. The scholarly debate continues to try and excavate the real women behind these legends, sifting through biased records and fragmented evidence to reconstruct their lives and understand their choices within the harsh constraints of their time. The shocking secret of the executed female pirate's legacy is this duality. She is simultaneously erased and remembered, erased as an individual human being by the official record, yet remembered in horror, in legend, in the very extremity of her punishment. The gory history of her end becomes her most lasting, if most terrible, monument. She is reduced from a legend of the seas, if she ever was one, to a lesson, sacrificed to uphold empire and order, as your script notes so powerfully stated. Her final, silenced scream echoes not in triumph, but as a grim reminder of the price paid by women who dared to defy the iron grip of patriarchal power and imperial law on the high seas. Her true story, for the most part, remains a ghost, haunting the margins of maritime history. You have journeyed with us tonight through the dark and brutal realities that awaited a female pirate upon capture in the 17th and 18th centuries. From the biased Admiralty Courts that offered little hope of justice, through the humiliating death parade to the infamous execution dock, you have witnessed the calculated cruelty of the Marshal's Dance, that agonizing slow strangulation, and the ultimate post-mortem horror of the three tides and potential gibbeting. The shocking secret is not just the violence itself, but the meticulous, systemic way in which these women were made terrifying examples, their stories often twisted or erased, their defiance punished with an extra measure of societal condemnation. We've seen how a woman, before the mast, became a woman before the court, her gender itself a mark against her, her crimes deemed doubly transgressive. You've heard how the Piracy Act of 1698 sealed her fate with an almost ironclad promise of death, and how even a plea of pregnancy, as with Anne Bonny and Mary Read, offered only a temporary reprieve for a very few. You've walked the path from the squalor of Newgate Prison, felt the jeers of the London crowd, and stood in the cold shadow of the gallows at Wapping, where the river itself became an accomplice in the ritual of punishment. The gory history of these events, the medical hardship of such prolonged and public agony, and the sheer human endurance required to face such an end are almost beyond our modern comprehension. Mary Critchett's swift, unceremonious hanging in colonial Virginia serves as a stark reminder that not all female pirates became legends. Many were simply, brutally, and quickly eliminated. The purpose of all this terror, as we've explored, was to send an unequivocal message. Piracy would not be tolerated, and female deviance from societal norms would be punished with particular ferocity. The psychological scars left on society by these public spectacles of state-sanctioned brutality were as real as the physical ones inflicted on the condemned. As you now let these grim images of execution dock, of swaying ropes and jeering crowds, begin to soften and recede in your mind, remember that the stories of these women, however fragmented or distorted, speak to a desperate desire for freedom, or perhaps simply a desperate struggle for survival, in a world that offered them few legitimate paths to either. They were transformed from whatever complex individuals they might have been into lessons for the populace, sacrifices to uphold empire and order. The Thames still rolls silently past Wapping, but execution dock is long gone, its horrors now confined to the pages of history and the whispers of our sleep stories. In the safety and quiet of your own space, there are no such brutal judgments, no such public agonies. There is only the calm of the present.